We're going to have the talk now, and then we're going to go back into some worship, and we'll break bread together as well. Continuing our little series, our season on really focusing on Jesus. Really just getting into the kind of nitty-gritty. Actually, I'm going to hold this and get rid of this. This is in the way. So if you were asked the question, in one word, how could you describe the gospel? In one word. What one word could you use that demonstrates that Christianity is so distinct from any other religion, any other philosophy, any other thought process? What would that one word be? I wonder what people might come up with. You don't have to. It's not, grace. Grace. That's great. I'm so glad you have the right answer, because that's what I'm talking about today. Could be there are other words you could do, but grace. Actually, do you know what? There was a conference that were considering that very thing. Many experts from around the world. I think they went to Oxford. If you need to move that way a bit, everybody, please just move, yeah? Because I'm beginning to get a bit wet here. There was a conference in Oxford University where they were exploring that very thing. What unique contribution has Christianity made to the world? And C.S. Lewis, the scholar, the writer, he happened to walk through the room while this conversation was going on. And he asked them what they were discussing, and so they shared the topic. And he just went, "Oh, that's easy. The thing that most distinguishes Christianity above everything else there is grace." All right, grace. Grace, God's unconditional love. Coming to us free of charge with no strings attached. It's the most life-transforming reality, isn't it? That Jesus taught, but also Jesus lived it out, didn't he, as well? He lived it out. That no other philosophy, no other religion, no other political viewpoint can come anywhere close to this concept of the grace of God. I want to read from John chapter 1, verse 14. I think that's on your sheets. John chapter 1, verse 14. This is where John's introducing us to Jesus and the character of Jesus. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. We observed his glory, the glory as the one and only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. John testified concerning him and exclaimed, "This was the one of whom I said, the one coming after me ranks ahead of me because he existed before me. Indeed, we have all received grace upon grace from his fullness. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the one and only Son, who is himself God and is at the Father's side. He has revealed him." Just very quickly from that passage, I'm going to pull out 4 things just to make it very clear about grace. First one is in verse 14. Jesus is full of grace. His very essence is grace. Verse 16. From Jesus' fullness, we can receive grace upon grace. So we receive grace through Jesus, from Jesus. Verse 17. Grace can only be experienced through Jesus as well. There is no other way of you receiving grace. There is no other way of you getting grace. It's through Christ that you receive grace. And the last thing is that if Jesus is full of grace, and Jesus is the one that makes the Father known to us and reveals the Father to us, then our Father in heaven must be full of grace too. And it's so important. All through these last 3 weeks, I've been reminding us of these characters of Jesus, his love, his mercy, but also understanding that the Father has exactly the same. The Father is rich in mercy. The Father is full of love. The Father is full of grace as well. Grace is the unique foundation of the good news of Jesus. There are many things we do as Christians, aren't there? But sharing the message of grace should be of primary importance. The church might feed the hungry. We can do that, can't we? But you know what? There are other groups in society that do that. We have a community fridge. We've got Creative Hearts. They feed the hungry. The church might champion the homeless. But there are other groups that do that. We've got Turning Tides that do that in our town as well. There are many things churches can do as a response of our love for others. But other people can do those things too. There's only one thing that only the church can do, and that is to offer the world grace. To show the world the grace of Jesus Christ. This is the hardest time I've ever had to try and preach in my life. You're doing well to stay focused. At least you're all looking at me, that's good. God, this is hard, isn't it? You're right there, George. Oh, dear me. Keep with me, all right? Keep going. That story, all right, about the vineyard owner and the workers, and the idea that he paid that last worker, the last workers that started at 5 p.m, started just before the end of the day, the same full day's wage as the first worker, is a demonstration of grace. They didn't deserve it, did they? They hadn't done any work. They just turned up, put their overalls on, picked up the tools, and that was it. But they got a full day's wage. And Jesus told story after story about grace. And it's quite good. If you're reading through the Gospels, read it with a kind of an eye for looking out for grace stories. Because we read them quite often, and there are lots of things in the parables, there are a lot of things in the stories that Jesus told, but actually you'll see grace runs through them all. It's running through them. Stories about grace. The lost coin, the lost sheep, the lost son. You can read about those in Luke 15, can't you? They're all stories really about grace. Jesus is the shepherd who leaves 99 sheep to go and find that one lost sheep. And what does he do when he finds it? He rejoices in heaven. The woman who searches and searches and doesn't give up until she finds that lost coin. Jesus is that woman searching and searching because he's after you. He's after the lost. The father who scans the horizon waiting for his son to return and runs to meet him as he sees him and embraces him and clothes him and puts sandals on and puts a ring on. That's a story of the grace of God. He didn't deserve it, that boy. He squandered everything. But God restores him. Have you ever noticed that you find you have more joy when you find something that you have lost than when you first got that thing? Have a think about it. Think about your car keys. When you got your new car, you got keys with it, didn't you? I bet you didn't get that joyful about the keys, did you? You probably didn't think much about the keys. But then, you're in the south of France with the family, the car's packed, everything's ready, the kids are all in the car seats, and you're about to start the journey back to get to the ferry, and you can't find the keys. And you search, and you have to empty the whole car, and you search through every bag, and eventually it's always the last bag, isn't it? The last bag, and you find the keys. What joy there is in a family when you find the keys. Something that was lost has now been found, and there's great joy. Or perhaps when your child is born, yes, there's immense joy, isn't there? There's immense joy when your child is born. But just imagine this. I hope this never ever happens to any of us. But just imagine the joy you would feel if you got a phone call from the police to say that your child who was abducted 6 months ago has been found. Just imagine the joy you would feel. That's a little glimpse of the joy that God feels when the lost one turns to come back to him. That's it. The joy, a lost one found. It's a joy. That's what grace is all about. Grace comes freely, and it comes to us as individuals. This is interesting. If you think about it, the grace of God, right, comes to you as an individual. In all those stories, one lost coin, one lost son, one lost sheep. Grace of God is a personal thing that you personally get to experience. God choosing to reach out to you, to love you with no strings. No strings. It's our wedding anniversary today. Lovely. 29 years. And a demonstration of grace is that Tanya's still with me after 29 years. But even then, love in a marriage, I've got needs. Tanya's got needs, and we need to meet those needs, don't we? It's not completely unconditional love in a marriage, but the love of God is completely unconditional. Completely. The grace of God, the grace that Jesus is full of, is a gift. A gift that costs the giver everything, but costs the recipient nothing. And we can know the grace of God today, can't we? All right? The giver, God, who cost everything, who sent his Son to die for us. All right? We can receive the love and acceptance of our Father. That worker got employed at 5 p.m. Didn't really do anything, but got that whole full day's wage. All right, the vineyard owner did that, and it makes no economic sense, does it? If you were running a business like that, you really wouldn't survive very long. The people that turn up and only work for an hour get paid the same as those that work for 12 hours. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make economic sense. But that is exactly why Jesus told that story to the audience. That's why that story is recorded for us in the Gospels, because it just challenges us. Because no matter how many times we hear this message, all right, that grace is free, that God loves you because he loves you, we still somewhere deep inside think we earn his love. We still somewhere deep inside think, oh, good things have happened to me today because I've been good. Oh, bad things, oh, what have I done wrong? How have I displeased God? Have I displeased him? Oh, what have I done? Have I upset? Why is it? After day after day after year, I've had many years of hearing this message preached and declared, and I've read it in the Bible, but still something in us still believes that we earn our salvation. And I want to remind us, this is a free gift from God to you. It's not dependent on what you do. There's another story in the Gospels, in Matthew 18. And it's about, and Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven. It's like a king who wants to settle accounts. And when he begins to do this, he gets the servants to come into him, the ones that owe him money, to sort out. And there's this one servant that comes in. He owes him millions of pounds. And he's brought in. And there's no way he's going to be able to repay that debt, that millions of pounds. So the master orders that he, his wife, and all his children are sold to pay off the account. The servant falls at the master's feet and he says, "Be patient with me, I will repay you everything." There's no way you can repay him everything. But the master felt sorry for his servant. And what did he do? He freed him. And he cancelled his debt. This is what Jesus told this story. He freed him and he cancelled the debt. This is grace. We've got a debt we cannot pay. Right? But God, full of grace, doesn't just come up with a payment plan and say, pay this much each month. Right? Like a credit card company might do. What does he do? He wipes the debt completely. Nothing to pay. We deserve punishment, but he willingly sets us free. And if it wasn't raining and cold, you'd all be going, woo, woo, woo. I know you would. I know you would. The reason Jesus told this story in the first place was because a question that Peter had just asked. And Peter had asked this question. He said, Lord, how often do I have to forgive a believer who wrongs me? How often do I have to forgive? All right, now you'd expect the answer to be once, wouldn't you? Forgive somebody, yeah. But the Pharisees, well, at that time, they taught, no, you should do it 3 times. You should forgive someone 3 times. So Peter, thinking he's got it sorted, he goes, 7 times, Lord? 7 times? Because he's like, I'm really righteous. Look at me. 7 times I would forgive. Jesus answered him, I tell you, not just 7 times, but what? 70 times 7. 70 times 7. Forgive 70 times 7. 490 times. I don't think Jesus intended us to keep a record of the times that we forgive. I don't think probably Tanya's forgiven me more than 490 times in our 29 years of marriage. I don't know, probably, over different things. Right? I've been forgiven much, haven't I? You've been forgiven much. Jesus is teaching Peter that we should live a life of forgiveness. So what does grace look like in my life? It actually looks like forgiveness. Forgiveness is a key part of grace. God has forgiven me. Therefore I will forgive others. Jesus continued then, because that servant has just been had his whole debt cancelled, hasn't he? Millions of pounds wiped off. And it goes on like this. Then the servant went away, and he found a servant who owed him a few £100s. And he grabbed the servant, all right, and he began to choke him. Pay what you owe, he said. Then the other servant did exactly like he did. He fell to his feet and begged him, be patient with me and I will repay you. But he refused. Instead, he turned away, had the servant put in prison until he could repay what he owed. Now, on reading that story, isn't it just ridiculous? It's ridiculous that a guy who's just been forgiven and released from the debt of millions and millions and millions, and released from prison, would in just turning around the corner in the palace, would suddenly go to the other guy and not forgive and not wipe off the payment of another. It's just ridiculous, isn't it? But what is Jesus telling us? That forgiveness is actually achingly difficult. It's actually really difficult. Forgiveness is really the outworking of grace in our lives. But forgiveness can seem so unnatural to us. So unnatural. It's often harder to do it than we think it's going to be. But Jesus invites us into the freedom and the joy that comes from living a life of grace to others. Of living a life of being quick to forgive. You see, forgiveness isn't just a soft way of dealing with hurt and pain. It isn't the simple way of dealing with any wrongdoing towards us. It isn't taking an easy route. It's actually warfare. Forgiveness is warfare. When someone hurts or abuses us, we're linked to them. We're almost chained to them in some way. But when we choose to forgive, it's like taking bolt croppers and breaking ourselves, cutting ourselves free from the hurt and the pain of that person. We can break the enslavement that we have to that other person because of what they've done. And it's not just personal. It's not just individual. It actually can be wider than that. I just want to tell you about a guy called Gordon Wilson. Gordon Wilson, in November 1987, he went with his daughter to a Remembrance Day service. And while he was there, an IRA bomb exploded. And he and his daughter found themselves buried under 6 feet of rubble. They lay there side by side, holding hands, waiting to be rescued. The last words Marie ever spoke were, "Daddy, I love you." A newspaper wrote this: "No one who heard Gordon Wilson will ever forget what he confessed. His grace," this is what the newspaper wrote, "his grace towered over the miserable justifications of the bombers. Speaking from his hospital bed, he said, 'I have lost my daughter, but I bear no grudge. Bitter talk is not going to bring Marie back to life. I shall pray tonight and every night that God will forgive them.'" And that act of grace, his act of forgiveness, impacted our world. All right, the Protestant extremists that were going to retaliate heard him and didn't. And it began work of reconciliation between Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland. Generations of unforgiveness, because that's what it is. If an event happened back with Cromwell, all right, and it's unforgiveness through generations upon generations upon generations upon generations, unforgiveness and hate were impacted for good through the act of grace, through the act of someone forgiving. You know, I don't know, I saw some of your faces as I told that. You're thinking of your own kids and your own family. Imagine, how would you deal with that if it was your family? But he chose to forgive. The end of the story that Jesus told, I think many of us would wish wasn't actually included in the Bible. Because he says this: "The other servants who worked with him and saw what had happened felt very sad. They told their master the whole story. Then the master sent for him," that's the first servant that got forgiven the millions, "sent for him. He said, 'You evil servant, I cancelled your entire debt because you begged me. Shouldn't you have treated the other servant as mercifully as I treated you?' His master was so angry that he handed him over to the torturers until he would repay everything he owed." Then it says this: "This is what my Father in heaven will do to you if each of you does not sincerely forgive other believers." Wow, that's tough, isn't it? This is Jesus speaking. "This is what I will do to you if you don't sincerely forgive others." How many of us have moved churches rather than deal with unforgiveness? Sadly, in the Christian world, there's lots of that. Rather than talk it through and work it out, we've just moved church. How many of us have seen breakdowns in family with brothers and sisters because actually I just cannot forgive them for what they've done? But Jesus says to us, "I've forgiven you so much. Forgive. Forgive." Spurgeon said this. Spurgeon's a 19th century preacher. He said this: "To be forgiven is such sweetness that honey is tasteless in comparison with it." To be forgiven is such sweetness that honey is tasteless in comparison with it. But then he went on to say this: "But yet there is one thing sweeter still, and that is to forgive." Jesus is full of grace, and his grace works out in so many ways, but one key way is in forgiveness. He has wiped the slate clean from your life. If there was an account, right, of your mess-ups and your sins and your disappointments with God, it is absolutely blank, because Christ has wiped it clean. He has forgiven you. So, forgive others. Forgive others. Let's live with being quick to forgive. Quick to forgive. For Christ has forgiven us so much. We're going to worship. We're going to sing together. There's bread and juice. Joe's bought gluten-free bread this week because we're not sure whether people say it's all gluten-free. So whatever you take, it'll be gluten-free for people. And juice, just when you want to, if you want to, go and grab some and sharing that together. I would encourage you. Right? The wind's blowing, so any germs are going to blow away quickly. Do actually go up to be in a group and pray for each other and worship together and just break bread. There's a fellowship, isn't there, in this, right, of sharing bread and wine together. But Leah and I will sing, join us and sing along. We're going to sing that new song that Kelly introduced last week as part of our worship. But do join us and worship. But I want you to just focus on how much you have been forgiven. Remember that servant? That servant who owed millions should have been put in prison with his wife and his kids, was set free. Those workers who just turned up and got a full day's wage. The lost sheep, the lost coin, the lost son. Jesus loves you. He forgives you. He accepts you. He embraces you. Know his love today. Let's worship.